Alright, now let's look how to give it some bones and chains. A chain is a group of bones. In the Model tab, under Create, Skeleton, we have 2D chains and 3D chains. The difference is the limit of the bone's rotation. 2D chains are restricted to certain axes, and the 3D chains can move freely. A typical example of a 3D chain is the tail of a dog. It can move freely on any axis. But we're going to concentrate on 2D chains, which most resemble the human bone structure. We'll practice drawing a few bones and chains, and then actually use them to affect some geometry. So let's start by selecting a 2D chain. Once you click, you get a pen to begin drawing. So click on the screen to start. Another click further along and it draws the bone. The bone will stay put as soon as you release the mouse, and then you have the option to end the chain using the middle or right mouse button if you want a chain with only one bone, or continue drawing more bones using the left mouse button. Let's start with a 2-bone chain like I have here. Then right click to end the tool. And I'm going to maximize the front view in vertical. And I'm going to replace the right view with our schematic view. Select View, Rearrange All, and we have the root, which will move the whole system. We have the first bone, the second bone, and the effector. The effector lets me manipulate the chain of bones the way I'm showing here, each bone applying specific forces on the others it's connected to. If we want to modify the position of the bone, we can go to Skeleton and choose Move Joint or Branch, or by pressing Ctrl J. Using this tool, I can click and move the position of the bones. Now let's talk about forward kinematic motion versus inverse kinematic motion. Select the effector at the end of the chain. And in this case, the effector is used for inverse kinematics. If I move the effector, the bones will try to follow a natural movement, trying to simulate how bones would actually move in a human body. This is called inverse kinematics. But, for example, take the bone and rotate it like this at what we could call the knee. And I'm now working with forward kinematics. This is forward kinematics, and this is inverse kinematics. When we are animating a character, we normally use forward kinematics for the parts of the upper body, the arms, the torso, the head, and we use inverse kinematics for the legs. Before we set up the more advanced rigs, let's start by creating our own very simple one. It is also important to realize that the view in which we decide to draw our bones is a very significant thing. It actually is going to dictate the angle in which our bones will move. So the view you're drawing in is a good thing to take into account before you get too deep. Normally, we have our top, front, and right. Okay. I'm going to erase this bone chain. And now let's get a sphere, for example, which we'll use to simulate the human body. Then we'll give it some legs. Because of how we see our character, we usually begin to work from the front view. If I draw a chain in the front view, however, we'll get some strange joint movement in the legs. Therefore, I'm going to draw the chain in the right view. Something more or less like that. Control J to modify. And V to move. Now we have an option under skeleton, duplicate symmetry, choose default, and it automatically places both of them. Now we're going to take both the root bones, go to the schematic view, root, parent, and you have to select the parent. In this case, if you look down below, you'll notice that the middle mouse button will pick our parent, and the sphere becomes the parent of the two legs. Now, if I move the sphere, the legs will follow. And we can play with our effectors to simulate some walking movements. Next, let's look at what we call constraints. Go to primitive, implicit, and in this case, let's select a cube. Implicits work well as they are easy to see and manipulate, but will not render. So scale it down a bit, and I'm going to place it more or less in the same position as the effector. Duplicate, and then move the other one a little bit for the other leg. And now we're going to constrain the position of the effector on the cube. Go to Constrain, Position, and select the implicit cube. Same with this one. Constrain, Position, and select the cube. Now, if I move the character's body, it responds with legs that are anchored to the floor. If I want it to walk, I have to move the cube itself. This is actually a really great exercise in a very basic rig. In more advanced rigs, there are many parent relationships between objects and constraints. I'm going to move it back to its original position. There we are. Now, you can always rotate or reposition your bones later, but if I wanted to add arms to my rig here, it would be best to begin drawing them in the top view, like this, so they bend in front of the body as real arms would. Then we position them, parent them, and then we can finesse. Select the whole chain, go to Skeleton, Duplicate Symmetry, OK, and there we go. But we still have to parent up this arm. So click Parent, then middle click to pick, And now you have it. You can see how even the simplest rig can lend a lot of life to a character. XSI contains some very useful pre-built rigs and advanced rigging tools which allow an enormous amount of control over your characters. You may want to zoom in a little. I could move and animate the effectors using inverse kinematics, or I can animate the bones locally to work with forward kinematics. Now press Ctrl N for New Scene. And let's look at the pre-built rigs in XSI. We'll start with a simple one. Skeleton Man Basic. It may look complex, but this is actually a very simple rig as well. It's just separated into various parts. You have some constraints, or you can move certain bones to adjust down the hierarchy. You have some constraints, one of the advantages of the pre-made rigs is that if I choose the body man, it is, by default, in scale to the rig, which we could quickly use to position or modify the character. It's the same with the body woman. The second XSI rig we're going to look at is a Skeleton Man Complete. This one has several more controls and a more detailed bone structure. Including bones in the hands. It also has these little cubes behind it that control the rotation of the elbows. Undo. And you'll notice that the face has some nulls that would really help us with any facial animation that we do. This bone for the jaw. If I pull out the body man again and switch to shaded, you may notice the crosses that mark the areas that have been used to capture the face so that we can animate it. Down below, you can try moving around the little cubes. Switch back to wireframe, and you'll see how they actually help rotate the knees. We also have biped box, biped skeleton, and biped rig. Biped box simply generates boxes at each key area of the body. The biped box can be useful though when you're setting up basic forms. In the next chapter, we'll talk about some of the more advanced motion rigs. It may help out to pause for a minute or two and just kind of experiment for yourself with some of the rigs we've been talking about. Okay, from the Model tab, select Primitive, Model, Biped Rig. This is a more advanced rig, much closer to what we'll actually be using most of the time. I'm going to take away the body. This rig is definitely a bit more elaborate. It already has constraints applied. And it also has controls for the knees, arms, elbows. You can see the series of bones that simulate the vertebrae. And if I rotate this inner control, you'll see it rotate the hips and spine quite convincingly. Using just that, we can make our guy do a nice little dance. We have controls on the shoulders, the head, like is it some kind of heavy metal show, and even, with the control near the heel, the pivot of his feet. Also, a really great feature is that if I select a part of the rig and press F3, the Synoptic Editor appears. This contains several different presets for that rig. You might want to mess around with them for a bit. We can reset all to go back to the original position. It has different, in this case, positions or poses for the hands. You can see them here. Relaxed, a fist, spread. There are even sliders where we can control all the parts independently. The fingers, right and left hands, even rotating parts of the bones. I can select this outer control here and move up or down, or we can grab the leg constraints and experiment. There are also a bunch of different preset poses that you can use as starting points, or to animate between. Take a couple minutes and just check out how some of these poses are put together. Get a feel for the rig. Cool. Now let's look at how we can use these bones to actually deform models. Let's get a sphere. Maximize the window. Go to Skeleton, 2D Chain, and draw a 2-bone chain from the base to the middle, and then up to the top. Now what we want is for the bones to deform the sphere when you manipulate the bones. The way to do that is to designate this as a deforming envelope. To do that, we have to go to the Animation menu, which is number 2, and from here, we choose Envelope in the Deform submenu, and then, making sure the sphere is selected, select Set Envelope. It asks if we want to apply it as a model operator or as an animation operator. Normally, we're going to apply it as an animation operator. So we'll press yes. And it asks us to choose the bones. Left click to individually select bone 1 and bone 2, then press the right mouse button to end your pick session. Now the first thing you'll notice is that it assigns blue to this bone and yellow to this bone, and that it assigns points with those colors, depending on where the points are in position to the bones. Go to your shaded view and press W to begin using the weight brush paint tool. We can see the colors of the bones and the gradient that exists between the two bones, or the blue and the yellow, blending them into each other. If I take the effector and move it, I can deform the sphere like so. I can use the effector, or I can choose and rotate each separate bone. Next, we're going to go into some detail on how to control the influence each bone has on its surroundings. While enveloping, we can assign greater weights to specific bones, even those not immediately adjacent. With the object selected, let's select your weight brush paint panel by clicking the small brush near the bottom left corner of your screen. Up here, we have a listing of bones and their corresponding colors. Now I'm going to tell my brush to paint influence from the yellow bone. W to paint. And let's make sure our tool is in add, not smooth mode. Okay. Now with the middle mouse button, I can expand my brush size and I can paint in more yellow influence. Now, when I move the object, I have more influence from the yellow bone. Again, W, and I can continue right on painting, giving more influence to the top bone. I can also select a group of points and tell it that all these points should be assigned to the blue bone. I just hit local reassign, and then I can choose the blue bone. Now, even if I move this, I can rotate it. Only one part is being affected. Then I can do it to the whole model. Local reassign, and there we are. If I rotate this one, it doesn't have any effect on the points. And if I rotate this one, it affects the complete sphere. For even more control, let's check out the weight editor by choosing the option here. It shows me the influence in percentage values. Here we have the points, 57 points, and it shows me the percentage of influence the blue bone has in comparison with the other bones. In this case, we have 100% of the points being influenced by the blue bone. If I go and select the top portion, local reassign to the yellow bone, and open the weight editor again, I can see how these percentages have changed. 0, 100, 0, 100, 0, 100, 0, 100. Now, what I'm going to do is apply a smooth distribution to these influences. Go to the weight map, and right now, the two weights are pretty much evenly matched. So let's tell it to apply a smooth transition so that we can even it out a bit. Apply smooth, and you can see how the points change their percentages. Now, if I adjust the neighborhood depth and the distance scaling, I get a much smoother gradient. While you're weight painting, keep in mind that you always have 100% influence to distribute somewhere. It's just a matter of how you choose to distribute that influence that creates believable deformations. You can even export this weight map as a preset, load presets, save other presets, and apply them to different characters. Next, we're going to attempt a little more lifelike envelope. In a new scene, get a primitive, model, Faceman, and then choose either of the two presets you created earlier. Switch to shaded, and subdivide it a couple times using the plus key on your keyboard. And we have our character head. Now, let's apply a bone to what would be his neck, one for his head, and one for his jaw. Go to Skeleton, 2D Chain, and you'll notice right away that the bone is too big. So let's scale up our head a bit, and it's going to be a lot easier. About 3.5 times. Skeleton, 2D chain, place it where the neck would be. We'll stop there. And draw another one for the head. Right button to end. And a jawbone from just under the ear out toward the chin. Now, let's create the hierarchy before we start deforming the model. We'll create our hierarchy using the bones we just created inside our head, in which the parent bones will propagate their position and rotation values to the child bones. Open the schematic by pressing 9. And we're going to make the head bone a child of the neck bone. Middle-click the root of the head bone to select the hierarchy, hit Parent, and then middle-click the effector of the neck bone. Now let's make the jaw a child of the head bone by middle-clicking the root of the jaw hierarchy, selecting Parent, and then middle-clicking the head bone effector. Okay, so now if I move the neck bone, the whole chain will follow. And if I rotate what would be the head, the jaw follows. So next we're going to create a group of bones that will serve as our deformers. Select the bones, Control G, and then press F2 to give it a new name. Let's call it envelope group. That way we have isolated the 3 bones that we're going to use. Now by selecting the entire object, we go to Deform, Envelope, Set Envelope. Do you want to create an animation operator? Yes. And select the envelope group. Notice the combination of colors: pink for the neck, blue for the head, and yellow for the jaw. But here, for example, if I rotate the yellow bone, it rotates a little too high. We can easily fix this. So let's tell it that all these points, including these ones, all these up top and in the back, we want to assign to the blue bone. Select the weight brush, go to Local Reassign, and select the head bone. Now let's try it. I want to constrain the eyes in a few points here. All these guys to the head bone as well. These other points don't really matter too much. And now let's zoom and select some of the points we want to move with the jaw. Let's go to Local Reassign to the yellow bone, the jaw. Now if I rotate, you'll notice that we still have some small problems that we're going to need to fix. So identify any of the problem points. In this case, it looks like these here. Local Reassign to here. And we'll do the opposite above. We can also make it so that when the jaw moves, some points on the cheeks move as well. Select the yellow bone, press W, select Add, and we'll paint a little. We'll add a little opacity. Then use R to make your brush a bit smaller. Activate the symmetry function to keep things even. And paint. We just want to add a little influence in the blue. And remove a little bit on the eyes. Now let's check it out. We can pull a little bit up. Five opacity. A little bit smaller. And a little bit more influence for the yellow bone. I'm going to add back a little blue here. And smooth it over. Now, if I rotate the head bone, we'll turn his head from side to side, or up and down. And if I rotate the jawbone, we'll open and close his mouth. But I really don't want his neck to move so much with the mouth. So let's paint a bit more influence here in the pink. Add, up the opacity. And you can just watch the reaction in your mesh as you paint. You can see the geometry change as I adjust the amount of influence each bone has over the envelope mesh. Again, this is an area that we could spend a lot of time finessing our work, but we've already achieved some pretty nice results. Now let's try enveloping a complete character. In a new scene, get a body woman. Then select the biped rig, and don't worry if it looks a bit daunting. Select the body. Make sure you're in the animation tool set. Select envelope, set envelope, apply it with an animation operator, yes, and now we have a pick arrow. So to make picking easier, press 8 to bring up the Explorer, open the biped rig components, click the group called envelope group. Then press your right button to end the pick session, and it's assigned. Switch to shaded view, and move some of the controls to see how the rig is deforming our model. You may notice when rotating the arms, there's still a few areas we'll want to work on. You could also look for any other areas that may be problematic. It's mostly under the arms. In general, though, it works pretty well. So we should be able to clean up these areas without much trouble. Switch to your weight map brush by pressing W. Switch to your weight map by pressing the little brush. And let's apply a smooth. Bring up the neighborhood depth a bit to spread the influence. And let's hit F3 to bring up the synoptic editor and test some poses. Just try out a few different poses to see how the envelope is working. With the mesh selected, add a few subdivisions using the plus key to make it a little bit smoother. And try moving her around a bit. Good, well that's not too hard. But let's see how to deal with models not already in perfect proportion with our rigs. Select File, Open, navigate to Scenes, and open the Small Guy scene. No, we don't want to save the previous scene. Okay. So here's an interesting looking little guy. Obviously, not all the models we're going to work with are going to have human forms or the same human proportions. So if we select, for example, exercise standard body man, they have completely different proportions. And if we select the biped rig, it's going to have the wrong positions assigned. So let's switch to wireframe. Drag to select the rig, or better yet, let's press A to use the Explorer, and get rid of the biped rig, so we're just left with our small guy. And check out a useful tool under Create, Character, called Biped Guide. And click OK. Now we can just adjust this guide to match, starting with what would be the waist of our character. To make it easier, select the mesh, hit the selection button, visibility, and uncheck the selectability of the character. Hit the lock, 2 clicks, and we'll leave it there. And now we can see a bit better to align our hips. Then bring down the knees. You'll notice that we're adjusting symmetrically. Bringing up the feet. Switch to a user view, new perspective. Make the feet a bit smaller. And rotate them out a little, matching as best as we can. Now let's go to the upper body, the neck, the head, bringing the shoulders in a bit, the elbows, the hands. And it's a good idea to check out our different views to be more precise. Make sure everything is properly aligned. The better our guide placement is now, the better our final results are going to be. So I'll just move this a bit more, right around there. And let's not forget our reference points. These little guys tell a rig how to better weight the mesh, especially in areas such as the stomach here, and for bits like the calves, which are further away from the bones. Just pull the controls in for a nice tight fit. The more information we have for our geometry, the better it's going to look in the end. So bring in the spacing besides the arms. The ears. Pull these down a little. Lift this up. Like that. Now take another quick look to ensure everything looks in place. And now that we have placed the guide in the appropriate form and position, let's go to Character, Rig from Biped Guide, and you'll notice that we have different options here for the head, the stomach, how they'll act. For now, we're just going to leave all the defaults and hit OK. It takes a few seconds to create and apply the rig from the guide. And there we have it. Now if we want to explore, Character, Selection, Visibility, we'll reactivate the selectability. And we can erase our guide by middle-clicking to select the entire branch and then hitting Delete. Then go to Envelope, select Envelope as an animation operator, yes. Look for our biped, click Envelope Group, and right-click to end. Switch to Shaded View. No, let's see, how about a Hidden Line mode? And right away, we can see a problem in the knees, just bending a bit too close together. So let's move these effectors back here, each in a little. And remember that all these deformations are created with the weight maps. So in any of these problem areas, we'll select a weight brush, apply a smooth, lock the window and leave it over here. And we're going to want to fix under the arms, bringing up the neighborhood depth just a few steps. Test out some other areas and see how it's moving. And it looks like there are just a few other areas we could probably smooth out a little bit more. So let's bring the neighborhood depth up even more to relax the movement a bit. Check weights in the elbows. We can always paint influence into parts that we don't like, but really, this has done a pretty good job in its placement. I mean, the stomach here is almost perfect. Press W for the weight brush. Turn off proportional and symmetry. Go to Pick, Wireframe, and we can assign all these points to this bone. It's running a little bit slow because I'm capturing as I go. Normally it's going to move a lot faster. Now let's start painting. Apply a quick smooth. When you first get started on your characters, I recommend that you start with a character that has a lot fewer polygons. That way the process is going to be much faster, both for the computer and the amount of weight mapping that you'll need.